This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
So you want to be a CISO? Well, then if you want to be a CISO, or maybe you are already a CISO, you're definitely going to want to listen to this episode. And here's why. So this is a book review, and the book is called The CISO Evolution. And by the way, is it CISO? I don't really know, but that actually rhymed. Anyway, the book's called The CISO Evolution, Business Knowledge for Cybersecurity Executives. And I was lucky to get one of the authors, Matthew Sharp, on the podcast. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. This book, it's not what I'd expected. And I say this during the interview. I really expected a book that was kind of technical, talking about cybersecurity issues. And what I found is that this book is primarily about the business side of cybersecurity. In fact, let me just read you from the inside jacket. It says, in this book, readers will learn how to establish an executive presence and provide critical messages to senior leadership in a language they will understand and in a way that secures the engagement and interest of corporate boards. So again, this book was really unique. I'm fairly familiar with a lot of different financial terms. This book is excellent because it covers it in a way that's not disconnected from the concepts of risk in cybersecurity. So like most episodes, get your pen ready, get ready to take notes, because Matt Sharp is really going to dig deep into some of these concepts. And I truly believe that if you want to succeed as a CISO, as a security leader, you've got to understand these business concepts. Get ready and go. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
This is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So let's just jump a little bit into your background. So I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and it looks like, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you've been formally in security since 2006. Let's first of all, tell me if I'm right on that. Is that generally about right? 2006?
Yeah, that's right. I went to school for computer electrical engineering. Graduated and spent a year and a half or so in a computer animation company doing website design or building, basically framing out websites. So I was a .NET developer for a brief stint. And then I interviewed, I knew I didn't want to write code, and I interviewed at Coalfire for a help desk role. And I interviewed at Chili's for a server role. And I did not get the Chili's role, so
you got lucky.
Yeah, that's
there.
Right.
You go. There's a lesson to the audience. We'll call it the Chili's test. Very awesome. So all right, so let's move up to present. So let's talk about like the last 2 years. What have you been up to the last 2 years besides writing books? We'll jump into your book here in a minute or two. I know you're at LogicWorks. Let's just talk about last 2 years. What are you doing? What are you up to?
Yeah. So LogicWorks is a company that is essentially digitally transformed the MSP experience. So we have what we call a cloud reliability platform, and it's a SRE take on managed services for folks who operate workloads in the cloud. And I've been the CISO for LogicWorks since early 2017, starting just post PE investment, and we've recently sold the company to Cox Communications. Just a week or two ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, exciting. It's good. It's exciting stuff. So we're happy to have strategic investment, and I think that there's a fantastic growth story, and we're going to be bringing together capabilities from an asset that already existed in the Cox portfolio, the RapidScale organization, and we're going to be merging those capabilities with LogicWorks to basically provide A to Z IT services for folks in the cloud.
So I always research my guests, and one thing that I've got to ask you about is the sabbatical you took in 2012. So you had a lot of things in there. You did the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage, which is you walked over 800 kilometers, around 500 miles. 2 questions. What were the signals that you needed to take the sabbatical, and why the pilgrimage?
What were the signals and why the pilgrimage? It's a great It's a great couple of questions. I was burnt out. I mean, at the time, if I go back, I was director of strategic services at Fishnet. I was traveling 80%. My health was not great. My relationships were not great. I had more points than I could spend on the airlines and in the hotels. And it was just clear. I had overinvested in career and underinvested in all of the things like health and well-being and family and friends and all the things. So it was an opportune time for me to sort of step back and hit the reset button. So that was definitely it. I mean, it's interesting you asked that, or you make the comment at the time, and I think I even write about this in the book. We went out of our way. I went out of my way to basically justify. So at the time, the signals or the signs, it didn't matter. I was going to draw the conclusion that I needed to go on another adventure anyway. And so I had probably less courage and more confirmation bias working against me in that decision. So anyway, it's funny to step back and think about that now. But I was burnt.
Well, that is always a good reason. But obviously, as we mature in our careers, this is the reason I asked this question. Is there's been a lot of discussion on LinkedIn around CISO burnout, and so I'm always asking professionals around like were there early signals, because I think younger in your career you tend to you want to do everything, right? You want to take on all the work. I can do it. And then a lot of times I've had a similar scenario in previous jobs where I was on the plane 80-90% of the time, and you kind of just get used to the rhythm of it. And you come home and you're like, these relationships feel different, right? Like it's colder, it's more distant, right? And while this isn't a counseling session, but I think this is something that's really common, which is why I asked, just are there signals? So I guess the goal is as we get older is to try to be able to identify those sooner rather than later.
The ones that were obvious to me were, I remember trying to walk across the street and there was a car coming, and I tried to move quickly, and I had spent so much time sitting down that like my knee was fatigued and I couldn't even like jog out of the way. And I was, 30 years old or something, 28 years old or what, I forget how old I was. So that was a dead obvious. And then, there's an inflection point. So I have managed to stress my marriage to its capacity a couple of times. And it's always a clear observation that there's an amount of travel that you take where people are excited for you to come home. And then there's an amount of travel that you take where people are just disrupted by your presence. So like think 80-20 on either side, 80% home, 20% away, people are happy. And then you flip that and it's like, well, now you're just disrupting my, like you're messing with my, just the cadence of daily life. And then you show up and you like disrupt all of that. So I think that was definitely something that that was pretty explicitly stated, that sort of prominently features in my mind right now. So the hurting knee and the why the heck are you here when you're actually at home is a good indicator.
I love that. That is a really good signal. And I think I'm glad you highlighted that, because now that you say it, I can remember both of those. And I think it's that's a benchmark I'm going to use moving forward is are they actually happy to see me come home? Because, I leave so rarely, or is it like you said, the latter? It's like, now you're bothering my schedule because I've, built my life with you not being here, which is not what you want in a relationship. Totally. So, but I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really useful for our audience. So let's jump to the book. So CISO Evolution. When you, everybody writes a book for a reason, right? If somebody else was kind of talking about it, or at least talking about it in a way that you thought was useful, you wouldn't write the book. So my question for you was, what was missing in the market that prompted you to actually write the book?
Yeah. I just felt like for 15 years, I was looking for the answer, how to speak to the business in business terms. And I would hear this cliche sort of statement issued again and again and again. And what I wanted was a framework or a structured approach or a way to pry that open and to really functionally develop the skills. So there's, people use these terms like executive presence and gravitas and a handful of other things. And then you kind of ask them what they mean, and you get answers that are incredibly vague, like it's like pornography, you know it when you see it, which isn't helpful when you set out to systematically develop the skill set, right? And so I think that was what I initially triggered me to go get an MBA. And then after the MBA, it was clear to me, because I went in with the intent of capturing business knowledge, how could I convey the information that I was learning as it directly relates to the role of a cybersecurity professional. And then midway through my MBA, I transitioned from consulting to be an operator, and I ran the global security program for Crocs. And so I think for me, the goal was to really share, here are some structured approaches that have worked for me, and maybe some lessons learned about opportunities or instances where we've failed. So it was articulate the opportunity more clearly, highlight where successes and failures had happened, and then give concrete case studies sort of in an MBA format. And then I think obviously Rock brought the inspiration and really brought the whole book together, because without, and I've talked about this in other places, but he came to a Birds of a Feather session at RSA 2020, and sort of stemming out of that conversation, we agreed to write a book. So yeah, I think that was but the key piece was, let's give people a structured approach to develop business acumen that's relevant and tailored to cybersecurity.
I love that, because I'll be honest with you, when I started reading the book, I was like, wait, this is not the book this wasn't what I was expecting, right? I kind of expected what I had read in, dozens of other cybersecurity books. I appreciate it. That's what I appreciate about this book, is that it is very, HBR, Harvard Business Review, like the way it's written with case studies. And so I think that that's why I wanted to have you on, was to kind of talk a little bit more about that. So if we jump to chapter 3, it's on making business decisions, and you went down a different route than I thought you would. Okay. You cited Daniel Kahneman's research on decision science. Tell me this: why does process matter more than analysis, and what's the impact and application for security leaders who often have to make decisions quickly?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I thought what our approach was to say, in an ideal world, we're all Spock and we make these rational decisions. But the reality is that's not what happens at all. We make these totally irrational decisions. And it turns out there's this entire field of study that explains different biases and systematic cognitive sort of malfunctions that cause us to make these really unusual decisions. And so when we start to apply that to cybersecurity, cybersecurity professionals, by and large, are influencing, right? You're framing up risk and asking other people to make decisions. So for me, it was, let's lay a foundation or groundwork, basic understanding of decision science, and then leverage tools like choice architecture and influencer and others in order to give a structured approach to as you said, put a process in place that allows folks the opportunity to systematically improve the kinds of decisions that get made, and also to influence decisions to be made in a way that they would prefer. So it's both about influence, and it's also about creating a more predictable way to create more solid outcomes on the whole. And that could be, should we fund this project? Should I hire this person? Should I fire this person? Should I stay in this job? All of those kinds of decisions are basically subject to all of these biases and can be improved by having a systematic approach. And then the second piece, which I think I'm learning more and more now, is having a systematic approach also creates defensibility and allows you and an independent peer or another executive to run through that approach and essentially derive the same conclusions, hopefully. And so, in a world where there's increasing levels of litigation and personal liability falling on CISOs, having a structured approach to make and framework to make decisions, I think, especially in short periods of time with lots of pressure, can be very valuable.
How does I'll ask you from an example perspective. What's like a practical example of that? Like, how have you used it? Maybe what's something you could share to give us maybe something concrete on what this might look like?
Sure. Well, I mean, the funding decision is the decision that comes up all the time, right? As is no secret, many CISOs are underfunded. As a result, they struggle with a lot of the things that we talked about before, burnout and frustration and the like. So one of the things that you want to do when you're framing up a decision for an executive is to really obviously understand the influence factors that are going to create bias. So who are the people that surround them? What are the key initiatives and structure of the business that's going to formulate a foundation for decision making? And then, in addition to that, what are the likely biases that you need to overcome, and how can you develop choices and articulate those choices in a way that's not going to result in an answer that you don't want? So AppSec, you want to get an AppSec program funded, right? You can go in and say, we've got highs and criticals everywhere, and our production software is a mess, and all of those kinds of things.
I've never heard that.
Right,
never.
Right. Well, so we say this all the time. Or you can say, we have to have security in our software in order to develop trust with our customers, and that directly ties to the growth of our revenue and the retention of our customers over the long term. Or having this level of security gives us access to a market, because we can't sell to customers in financial services or healthcare until we satisfy certain compliance obligations. And so it's about trust and revenue growth as opposed to highs and criticals. And I think that's tailoring the audience. If you highlight what are some of the opportunity costs of not doing it for folks, and if you think about before you go into the conversation, what are the likely objections? Then you can short circuit that. You can in a lot of instances you can decide, oh, my CFO's objection is actually really valid, and I need to refactor and think about this proposal in a different way. Or you can say, hey, I've thought about that, and I ran a Monte Carlo analysis, and using a Monte Carlo analysis, I'm able to demonstrate that the net present value of this investment is going to be by and large positive. Or you can say, I'm trying to give you some tangible examples on how you can architect choices and present options and leverage some additional context in order to enrich decisions.
I mean, I've been in this position myself where, there's a cyber risk that I've identified in our program that had, no investment around it. And if you talk purely to usually the budget holder or the stakeholders in terms of cyber risk, that is not how they see the world, right? That's not what shows up on an annual statement or a quarterly statement, unless you've had breach and you have to disclose it, but that's separately. But that's not usually part of the lexicon, right? So I think it's actually very helpful. You mentioned that you got your MBA. Did getting your MBA lead you? Was that part of what led you down this path to start, even thinking about, okay, I've got this business knowledge of financial accounting, annual statements of cash flow, all these types of things that, if you are on the, let's say the more of the pure business side, that you would be more aware of, and that language. Do you feel that getting your MBA is what kind of led you down this path of discovery?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I mean, look, I don't think I got my MBA until 2016, and I think I enrolled in 2013, and I was already starting to do research and pay attention to that narrative long before that. I at Fishnet, always felt a little imposter syndrome because here I was this consultant and I was meeting CISOs across the country: Denver, Dallas, Omaha, NorCal, SoCal, a bunch in Kansas City, some stuff up in Minnesota, and so I had seen a large percentage of challenges and questions and problems from a lot of CISOs, but I hadn't been an operator myself. And one of the things that always came up to me is like, what's the disconnect, or why are people sort of experiencing the pain points or the conflict that they are? And then for those folks who were successful, who I observed as strong executives, why were they not? And so I think probably before the MBA was through the consulting experience, So like, I look back at people like Sean Irving, people like Jeff Weeks, Rick Howard, a handful of others who have done a fantastic job, who do carry all of the things that you would think, gravitas and executive presence and all the rest. And I started asking what was different about the way that they behaved and the way that they described their problems and the way that they engaged with their teams in front of us as consultants. And I think that probably pushed me in a direction. And then the MBA was I don't know, we go back and forth. Do you need an MBA to be an executive, or don't you? I think the answer is no, but you do need the core fundamental knowledge, the base of knowledge. It's probably the quickest way to get it. And if you don't have it already. And I'm a frameworks kind of guy. Like, I like, structure and organization. And so that was a nice way for me to capture or to gain that knowledge. But I think if you look at across the board, I don't necessarily know if Sean or Jeff or other folks that I mentioned, Rick, necessarily had MBAs, but then you also see a lot of really fantastic, strong leadership coming out of the military. And of course, they're doing the same kinds of things, but they add certain elements. So when I watch military leaders behave, we had some exposure through the Blackstone portfolio when I was at Crocs. We had some of the military leaders come in and just present and talk about their experiences, and the storytelling that those guys presented was phenomenal. I mean, not only was it super interesting because you got like the former head of NSA talking about an experience or interaction with Rumsfeld and kind of how that sort of dialogue around cyber risk went. So it was interesting because it was at a level that, most people will never, ever, ever get an opportunity to see. But
Sure.
But the storytelling was so compelling. You were just, it was like an amazing movie as well, right? Like the way that they delivered the content was really engaging and interesting, and had twists and turns and a climax and a surprise and all of these other things, funny jokes and all of that. So charisma, I think, is definitely an observation, and storytelling is an observation that I think came more out of interactions with folks that have military backgrounds for me.
Prisma Cloud secures infrastructure, applications, data, and entitlements across the world's largest clouds, all from a single unified solution. With a combination of cloud service provider APIs and a unified agent framework, users gain unmatched visibility and protection. Prisma Cloud also integrates with any continuous integration and continuous delivery workflow to secure cloud infrastructure and applications early in development. You can scan infrastructure as code templates, container images, serverless functions, and more while gaining powerful, full-stack runtime protection. This is unified security for DevOps and security teams. To find out more, go to prismacloud.io. So you open chapter 4 on value creation with a quote from Oscar Wilde. And the quote goes like this. It says, "Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing." How does that quote relate to cybersecurity and I guess the rest of the chapter on value creation?
I think your CFO knows how much they're spending on the cyber program. So whatever that number is, they know how many headcount, they know how much in CapEx and OpEx, they know how much they're spending. That's the price. The value is much more difficult to understand. And if you don't understand the core tenets of value, and I think in the book we break it down by just basically who, what, where, when, and why, and how. If you don't decompose value in that way, then you might be speaking to the wrong audience, or you might not understand necessarily the types of valuation methods that are applied, or the core metrics that drive value, or the delivery mechanisms for value. And if you don't understand those fundamentals, then how can you possibly articulate what is the value of the cybersecurity program? So if you can't say, we're investing in cybersecurity to make sure that we build trust with our customers, and also to make sure that the assets that we build in terms of intellectual property don't contain the wrong kinds of licensing that could devalue our company if we go to raise funds in capital markets. If you're not telling that story, in addition to we're driving down the vulnerabilities, or in addition to it's more than just the software, it's also protecting the pipelines, and here's why you need to protect the pipelines, then I think it's difficult for somebody to understand anything more than the price. And I think Paul Proctor just posted a fantastic comment on, are you sure we spent enough on this? Said no CFO ever. And it's so relevant because CFOs don't ask that question anywhere else in the business. And in some cases, They are asking CISOs, did we spend enough? And that's not the right question. Of course, it's not the right question, right? You're trying to build a capability to produce an outcome that is reduced risk, increased trust, stronger assurance, compliance, revenue growth, something like that, right? That's the capability that you're building. So anyway, they know how much they're spending. They don't know why they're spending it.
I think you're spot on with that observation. They know how much they're spending, but what is that actually equating to? I think that is where many security leaders are struggling, right? Just talking about what's the value that is being created from the investments in the cyber program. And I think, you talk about this kind of elsewhere in the book, but I think you touched on it a little bit right now, but are there any specific metrics? Is there kind of a standard list of metrics, or maybe I shouldn't say standard, but are there ones that you have used consistently in your cyber programs to demonstrate, to tell the story of the value that's being created, or is it highly subject to the actual company and things like that? Are there any reasonable ones?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. Again, Paul Proctor has done a bunch of really great research. They created some leading risk indicators that really apply to specific business models. So I think in his research, they do this fantastic example where he talks about prevented downtime has a direct impact on keeping trucks in a fleet, and those trucks in a fleet have a direct impact on revenue for the business, and the primary driver for value in the business is revenue growth, something like that. So I think the way that we talk about this, the first thing is to understand what kind of industry you're in and how you deliver value, how you derive value. And in order to do that, you understand valuation models, and you also understand at least a little bit of the calculations. So are you using multiples? Are you doing an intrinsic valuation? Is there some kind of other valuation? You understand your audience. So are you owned by a PE firm? Are you owned by a privately owned family, a holding company? Are you owned by a publicly traded organization? And then what are the things that people use to determine whether what's the current value? And so once you understand that, then you can pry apart the business model, and you can understand supply and demand sides of your business, and understand exactly which of those are driving the most value in the company. So if you're focused on revenue growth, top line growth, then it's going to be very different in a high growth company than in a much more mature industry with very slim margins, and it's all about volume. And so you got to get more efficient and manage costs down. So I think those are the sort of the starting points. And then once you've really sort of understood your business model and understood your value drivers, then you can start to think about how to structure the decisions in your team. How big are you going to make your team? Are you going to have more security champions, or are you going to build a fairly robust security engineering capability? Does it make sense for you to essentially have control of a bunch of stuff, or should you be leveraging outsourced opportunities through partners? And how is that all going to hit the income statement and the balance sheet? And where are you going to be able to essentially really differentiate your business or add competitive advantage? So I think without things like value chain mapping and business models and valuation metrics, it's very, very difficult to make strategic decisions about the way that you staff, about the software purchases that you buy, about even basic decisions like build, buy, or partner become, I think, much more clear based on, like I said, based on some of those other fundamentals.
So in this chapter, and I think you touched on some of these things already, you do spend a lot of time talking about some, what I would consider some fairly deep financial terms like discounted cash flow, enterprise value, EBITDA, things like that, right? So we touched on this a little bit, but why is it important for a CISO or a security leader to know what these terms are? And these are, quite frankly, the only reason I know what these terms are is from the last 20 years of personal finance, right? Looking at stocks and evaluate these models. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known them from what I learned in even going through a business information systems program at university, which was half computer science, half business. I wouldn't have known what these were or how they're used. So why is it important for a security leader to know what these terms are?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is this vision of sitting at Thanksgiving dinner, right? And you have all the parents at one table and you have the kids at a different table. And the dialogue is different at each of those tables. So which table do you want to sit at? You sort of opt in, right? If you sit down at the adults table and they're having an adult conversation and you're talking about something in a different direction or distracting from the conversation or causing a disruption to the flow of the dialogue because your vocabulary is not correct or because the topics are not appropriate or because the maturity of your discussion points don't really sort of resonate with the group, then you get invited to go sit with the kids. And I think the same thing applies here. If you want to sit at the table with the folks that are, if you want to be in the room where it happens, to quote Alexander Hamilton, then you have to be equipped to participate in the conversation. And if folks are talking about a bunch of terms that you don't understand, then it's very likely that you're going to say something that's not very aligned with the broader dialogue.
That makes sense. Chapter 12, getting toward the end of the book, was one of my favorites. So the topic of negotiation. From my experience of doing cybersecurity for over 20 years, CISOs generally, I think they typically fall into one or two camps. One is like my way or the highway, and I'd seen that more. I see that less now, but generally more in like typically highly regulated industries, where I think they have more to kind of stand on and point to. Or they on the other end of the spectrum, which is like, hey, what can I really do to stop the business? They always get what they want. Where does negotiation kind of come in, and what have most CISOs and security leaders missed?
Well, I mean, again, we're talking like if you just look at the cadence of what we're presenting, it's understand how decisions are made, understand how to engage in the dialogue, understand how to present a business case. Now, back at the back end of the book, the question is, how do you do that in an appropriate way? So first of all, the book, the chapter 12 is based on some work by former FBI negotiator wrote, and it's all about his techniques in negotiating hostage situations. And he talks about these concepts of creating tactical empathy. In other words, getting yourself to sit on the same side of the table and jointly staring down a problem. And that for me really resonated because if you're sitting on the same side of the table as your executive team and saying, how can we actively manage this cybersecurity challenge in a way that's appropriate for our business, then it doesn't force you into this fool's choice of it's either my way or the highway, which is not an effective way to manage anything. It doesn't work with your kids. It doesn't work with your wife. It doesn't work with animals. It doesn't work with anything. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then if it's not that approach, then just being railroaded and being a scapegoat at the end of a terrible outcome, of course, is not the right way to do things either. So we've got to find ways to not be the Department of No, and to create buy-in and ownership of the outcomes that we jointly achieve. And I think, again, having an ability to navigate saying no, but having it be someone else's idea is a critical component, right? So it's not just getting to the right answer, but it's also what's the journey to getting there, and how does the relationship get affected as you traverse that journey. And at the end of the day, I think my term with Crocs, I went in, we busted heads, we got a bunch of 10,000 vulnerabilities remediated in the first 120 days, and then it was a very challenging path forward for me because I didn't build relationships and I burned a bunch of bridges. And so going forward, although we managed to not get fined and a bunch of other things, going forward was actually a difficult slog. And so, so I think the key lessons were how do you get the outcomes that are necessary for the business and educate people along the way while protecting relationships as you do that. So that's been my approach this go, which has been just about 6 years with LogicWorks now.
So you've had a very progressive career in terms of learning from past mistakes, which is not always the case with people. I remember very early on in my career, back at Johnson & Johnson, I was talking with one of my colleagues who was much more experienced, and I was talking about somebody else, and I said, "Wow, they've got 25 years of experience," and he said, "No, Matt," he's like, "they have 1 year of experience 25 times." And it made me right. As a young buck right out of university, I was like, "Oh wait, there's people who actually learn from their mistakes, and there's same people that are just really doing the same thing kind of over and over again." So a long way of saying that, you seem to be learned a lot over the last couple of years, both from, signals that are, hey, it's time to take a break, to step away, to grow. But, more generally, Matt, when it comes to personal growth for you, like what's the formula that works for you? How do you continue to grow and kind of, as Stephen Covey would say, sharpen the saw?
Yeah, I love the Stephen Covey reference.
And interestingly enough, I do hear a saw behind you. So it's like a saw of something's running behind you. So it's like perfectly on cue. It's the ghost of Stephen Covey.
Nice. The audio. Yeah, we do have a small construction project going on, so apologize for the audio background. So we're actually presenting on this very topic at RSA, which is cool. So we spent a lot of time paying attention to these broader signals, like you mentioned. So we're going to talk about different data sources to get you more tapped into what's coming, what's on the horizon from a geopolitical, a macroeconomic perspective, and then to sort of to quote Gretzky, skate where the puck is going. And so for me, that's been, I think, part of the learning curve. I finished my time with Crocs, which is a wholesale retail manufacturer, which was fairly vertically integrated, more than 600 points of presence and a global footprint. And I decided that I wanted to do something that I was much more passionate about in terms of technology. And so that's why I pursued there was this emerging concept of DevSecOps, which had yet to really sort of take center stage. And digital transformation was, I think you could say, starting to touch some of the early adopters. And so that was the dive or the driving decision there. And then I think in the past, I really like learning and tackling the growth curve. And so as I bounced around through consulting roles, it was just one thing or another that was interesting technically, probably more than anything. And now I think there's probably a bit more of a focus on helping develop other leaders, giving back to a broader community, and trying to help people short circuit or not repeat the same mistakes that I did, right? Because just imagine if folks had all of this information that I have taken 20 years to get, and they got it in 3 or 5 years instead. How much better off would we be? So I think that's kind of the evolution. But yeah, we're going to be talking about betting the farm on digital disruption at RSA. And I think we'll be touching on a lot of this kind of framing up career development and thinking about how to attack that.
Well, that's exciting. I'll be at RSA, so I will. I'm going to make sure I sign up for your session. So are there any parting words that you would have for our listeners, or perhaps something you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
Yeah, I think there's ask the questions that go unasked. Don't be afraid to go and look like an idiot in front of another business stakeholder. They don't know about cybersecurity, and you don't know about their discipline. And I think it's okay to walk in front of the head of marketing and understand the strategy and approach, or go and stumble through a challenging conversation with the FP&A folks to understand how to derive value. I think shying away from that will only bolster the, like I said, imposter syndrome. And then, I mean, I think that's what I would really like to encourage folks to do, is to really take a proactive approach and get to know other parts of the business in a more intimate way. You're going to look like an idiot, but that's okay.
That's how you learn.
Like Silicon Valley says, go fast and break things or whatever. So we obviously want to do that with an appropriate level of concern for your career and personal reputation and all the rest. But you're not going to get better if you don't break some things or make some mistakes.
Matt, well, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I think this is probably going to be a very well listened to podcast. There's a lot of nuggets in there, both from your personal life as well as the book. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, man, appreciate it. Always happy to just sit down and share information, and super excited to have the opportunity to be on one of the premier cloud security podcasts out there.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.